In this video, I'm going to show you how to take a men's size extra large shirt and turn it into a plaid skirt using this as my inspiration. For this project, you'll need some interfacing in addition to the standard sewing supplies. It isn't absolutely necessary, but it will help stabilize the waistband. So let's get started. First, you'll need to take some measurements. Your waist circumference, or where you want the waistband of the skirt to be. The hip circumference, which is the widest part of your hips. The distance from your waist to your hips, and the length you want your skirt to be, from your waist to the bottom of the skirt. You can measure your body if you want, but if you have a skirt or pattern that fits you, you can use that instead. To prepare the shirt, first remove the pocket or pockets, if your shirt has them, by seam ripping or picking the stitches open. Then remove the sleeves by cutting them off on the sleeve side. To cut the front of the skirt, fold the shirt in half at the button plackets and pin the fabric in place so it doesn't move around. Draw a line about 1 inch above the second button down from the collar for the waistline. After completing the skirt, I realized 1 inch was a bit tight, so I recommend giving yourself 2 inches instead of 1. Take your waist measurement, divide by 4, add 1 inch seam allowance, and mark on the fabric. Measure the waist to hip distance and draw a second line for the hip. Take your hip measurement, divide by 4, add 1 inch seam allowance, and mark on the hip line. Draw a line from the waist measurement to the hip measurement. Make a mark on the button placket about 1/2 inch below the waistline and create a curve to the waist measurement mark. Calculate the total length of your skirt by taking your skirt length measurement and adding 2.5 inches for the hem. Using a measuring tape or yardstick, mark the total skirt length by following the waistline curve. Connect the marks to form a continuous curve for the bottom of the skirt. Leave the pins in place and cut out the skirt. To cut the back of the skirt, fold the back of the shirt in half. Use the front of the skirt as a pattern for the back. The back will be slightly bigger, so add more room by moving the front skirt pattern away from the fold. I'm going to add 2 inches, in other words, move the pattern 1 inch from the fold, but your measurements may vary. Pin the pattern to the skirt and cut it out. At this point, I pinned the skirt together and tried it on, and it was a little big on me, which turned out to be a good thing because I was able to recut the seams so that the plaids lined up. I made 2 small darts on the front and 2 larger darts on the back, and recut the sides of the skirt. To sew the skirt, the first step is to sew the darts. Unpin the side seams and unbutton the skirt to make it easier to work with. Iron a fold from the top to the bottom of the dart, the length of your waist to hip measurement, pin into place and draw a line from the top of the dart to the tip. I'm using a washable marker here because it's more precise than a scrap of soap. To sew the dart, start on the raw edge of the fabric, then sew off the fabric at the tip without back tacking, which can cause the seam to pucker. Tie off the ends of the thread with a double knot instead, and repeat with the rest of the darts. For reference, my 2 front darts were 3/8 of an inch and the 2 in the back were 5/8 of an inch. Realign the sides of the skirt and sew using your method of choice. If you want to use a French seam like me, make sure that you sew your first seam on the right side of the fabric with the wrong sides facing each other. So close to the edge of the fabric, I'm trying to sew just under a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Trim the seam allowance to 1/8 of an inch or so if necessary. Turn the skirt inside out and iron a fold as close to the seam as possible. On the wrong side of the fabric, sew a second seam a 1/4 inch from the fold. Pin the seam towards the back to prevent it from twisting, then repeat on the other side. Iron the darts towards the side seams, then stay stitched close to the edge along the top of the skirt to keep the darts and the side seams in place. To cut the waistband, first measure the waist of the skirt. Fold the skirt in half by lining up the button plackets, then measure the waist of the half skirt. Add an inch for seam allowance to calculate the length of your half waistband measurement. Cut the cuffs from the sleeves, then cut the sleeves along the seams to open them. Cut 2 rectangles, 5 inches wide and the length of your half waistband measurement from the fabric of the sleeves. After completing the skirt, I thought the waistband was too wide, so I ended up folding it in half. So if you want a narrower 1-inch waistband, then cut it 3 inches wide instead. And if you're matching plaids, it might require a little extra fabric. For the interfacing, cut 2 strips, 2 inches wide, and the length of your half waistband measurement, minus the 1 inch for seam allowance. Again, if you want a narrow waistband, cut the interfacing strip to 1 inch wide instead. To iron the interfacing to the waistband, fold the waistband lengthwise to find the center. Pin the interfacing strips to the waistband with the sticky sides facing the wrong side of the fabric, leaving room for seam allowance on the other 3 sides. Follow the instructions included with your interfacing, as they may vary, but mine are to steam press the edges of the interfacing strips to keep them in place first. Then remove the pins and cover with a clean damp cloth and press in place for 10 seconds. Continue until all the sections have been pressed. Let cool and check to see if the interfacing adhered properly. If you don't want to use an iron on interfacing, you can also use an extra layer of fabric the size of the original waistband. The seams may get a little bulky, but it should help stabilize the waistband. To sew the waistband, first attach the 2 sections together with the right sides facing and finger press the seam open. Pin the waistband to the skirt by lining up the center back of the skirt with the center back of the waistband, with the right side of the waistband facing the inside of the skirt. The interfacing should be facing up and on the side closest to the waist of the skirt. Pin the waistband to the skirt. There should be a 1/2 inch overlap when you get to the button plackets. Sew the waistband to the skirt. Iron the fold between the skirt and the waistband. On the wrong side of the waistband, create a fold around a 1/4 inch and iron into place from one placket to the other. Fold the waistband so that the ironed fold covers the seam by about 1/8 of an inch and iron into place. To create the vertical seams of the waistband, turn the waistband inside out. Line up the edges of the waistband so that the far side is slightly longer than the front to compensate for the fold. Pin into place and mark a line along the edge of the existing button placket. Sew along the marked line. Turn the placket inside out to make sure it looks good. Then trim the seam allowance and clip the corner. Then repeat on the other side. Fold the waistband and make sure it covers the seam by about 1/8 of an inch on the right side of the skirt and pin into place. On the right side of the skirt, top stitch the waistband to the skirt about 1/8 of an inch from the fold. After I tried on the skirt, I realized the waistband was too wide for my taste, so I folded it in half and sewed it down, which worked out. But if I were to make this skirt again, I'd make the waistband smaller from the start. I'm not that great with buttonholes, so here's another opportunity to develop my sewing skills. And yes, I have to get out the manual for this. And yes, it's the original manual from the 90s. Place the button or buttons on the waistband and mark where you want them and the buttonholes to go, using the buttons on the plackets as your guide. Because of the bulk of my waistband, I made the buttonhole horizontal instead of vertical. The existing buttonholes on my shirt are 5/8 of an inch, so I'm using that as my guide. So I followed the instructions using the buttonhole foot, and here's the result. To avoid accidentally ruining your buttonhole, place a pin on either side and use a seam ripper to cut the fabric without cutting the stitches. Then sew the button on the other placket. And all that's left is the hem. Try on the skirt to decide how long you want it to be. I want mine to be right there where this button is, so I'm going to remove it first. I think if I hem the skirt on this line, it will be nice and even all the way around. So first I'm going to fold up the raw edge 1/4 inch and iron it from placket to placket, then fold again and iron on the line. So all the way around the skirt, as close to the fold as possible, and that's it. We're done. And here's the result. Refashioning is not a straightforward process. There's a lot of experimentation, and sometimes my calculations just don't work out, so I generally give myself extra leeway for mistakes. And in this case, it worked out because I was able to get the plaids to match, kind of. They're not perfect, but pretty close. If I were to make this skirt again, I'd give myself more room between the waistband and the first button and cut the waistband narrower from the start. But overall, I'm happy with the way it turned out, and I hope it inspires you to try your own refashioning project. Thanks for watching, and happy upcycling!